lovely journal. Love the smell of it. Bit of a kink. Yeah, therapy session number 6 yesterday. It went well. I came into the session thinking I had nothing to say, and then spoke. I had to remind myself to slow down because I'm very aware of the time. And then I sort of talk too much information is thrown at my poor therapist, and she's trying to get me to slow down and look at the things I'm saying. But we talked about the fact that because I'd had visitors here, I hadn't had a crying time, and that was what we talked about in the previous session, which was allowing myself time, got a hair, to cry, and not putting a time limit on it, because I have a kind of fear, a concern, that if I start to cry out this feeling inside, that I won't stop. But that's never happened in my whole life, obviously. Although I do look like I've been crying, I can assure you I'm just tired. And we talked a bit more about how I saw what I felt I needed to cry out as some kind of tumour, as in a tumour made of intense emotions, emotions that have been so squished and suppressed that they have actually become this sort of almost solid mass, which she found really interesting. And it does sound, to me, it makes sense. It makes sense that there is so much stuff that perhaps this started out because of the childhood trauma with the adoption. Maybe it was just a little mass, and we all have a little sort of... I'm really hoping I'm not upsetting anybody talking about, saying that these little things are like traumas, but we all have this little kind of mass. And then depending on how our life pans out and how we learn to protect ourselves as to whether that mass gets bigger. And then the problem is that mass starts calling the shots. So rather than the brain necessarily, this ball of intense emotion, you can sort of ignore it most of the time, but every now and again it will just take over and you're massively triggered. So we talked more about that, and the fact I haven't been able to do that this week. I have a good cry because I had my daughter up, which was lovely, and I'd much rather be happy with my daughter than lying on the bed crying for an hour and a half, although I don't think I'd cry for that long. I'd be exhausted. So I haven't done that, but the thing that's going to come up in our next session is I have letters from my birth mother. I never met her, but we wrote to each other for quite a few years. I think it must have been about 6 or 7 years. And there is even a letter with my adoption papers of her asking for someone to come and collect me rather than her having to drop me off. So we're going to look at those. I'm going to read them, or she'll read them out, or we'll find a way of just looking at that and looking at the anger around it, because the adult me, the rational me, knows there was jolly good reason why I was given up for adoption, but the little me, the child, infant me, doesn't understand it, and that's what needs expressing. We need to connect with that part of me so that I can release it. And by working on these things, it doesn't necessarily mean that my emotional tumour disappears, but what it may mean is that it starts to dissolve and get smaller, so that it's not calling the shots so much. I mean, I don't think it does call the shots so much unless I'm in a particular type of situation. But then I think about, since hitting sort of perimenopause, my insecurities and my lack of confidence. So it's probably a combination of things, but I'm very ready to do the work. So that's really interesting. And I wonder if anybody else there can sort of relate to having this thing within you that you feel that you need to express, but it feels like it might be too much. Let me know.